you're gone!
Picard. Greetings, my friends! We are gathered here once again to discuss Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 3 this time, entitled 17 Seconds. If you are new here, or have just otherwise forgotten, there will be spoilers ahead, so consider this your last chance to bow out. Now let's crack on with the show. One thing this series has been doing so far that I'm actually enjoying is while they're doing a very serialized storyline with each episode basically picking up exactly where the last episode left off, we are treated to a handful of flashbacks. Generally it's only about one per episode, but they're filling in interesting details instead of just giving us dialogue about them. So for instance, we got to learn a little bit more last episode about who Jack Crusher was prior to our characters running into him. This episode, we got the flashback scene between Riker and Picard, set sometime after Nemesis, but way prior to the beginning of Star Trek Picard Season 1. This was when Riker's son was just born. This was a nice little scene. We got to see them acting a bit more in their element, I guess, with Riker, a full-blown captain at the time, in his element. Picard, recent admiral, it seemed, not that retired mentality we had when we met him in Season 1, less beaten down, and they had a nice little cordial, friendly scene. Not entirely sure here, it looked like it was supposed to be the 10 forward bar. Don't really think I feel great about that, however, if they have the set built, I suppose they're going to use it. Guinan didn't show up, there was no reference to it, so it could just be another bar that looks that way. During this scene, we got a little bit more of the backstory about Riker and Troy's son Thaddeus, who, as we recall, died because of the whole synth ban and his needing of medical treatment. Whatever, this is when Deanna was still at home taking care of the baby, and we got to see Troy in the first appearance of her character this season in a kind of holographic display window type of way where she called Riker and said, "You need to come home, take care of the kid, bring the whiskey." Not sure this is how I would have chosen to introduce her the first time into the season, but it did feel natural, so I don't fault it. And it was great to see our characters reminiscing and coming together in a low-stakes way as opposed to how I'm sure the rest of this season is going to be. So we also get here the meaning for the name of the episode, 17 Seconds, because, as we learn, Riker was called from the bridge of the Titan down to sickbay during the birth of the child, and it was the longest 17 seconds of his life. That's where the story comes from, and I believe that informs the character and the decisions he makes throughout the rest of this episode. We also get some more time spent with the Raffi subplot here with Worf. I do have to admit, I am enjoying it. It's feeling a bit better now that Worf has come into the picture. This whole underground subculture, drug den, whatever you want to call it, I could take it or leave it. It's just not that interesting of a plot, and I feel like the planet Metalis, supposedly doing that whole Blade Runner-y thing, reminded me of Krill from the Orville. I don't know, to me it just looks obviously like they're shooting in one really cramped street and trying to make us feel like it's an entire planet. Obviously that's probably just me reading too much into it. It just, it was great to see the interrogation scene between Raffi and Worf with the guy that they caught. They took him back to the La Serena, I suppose it was. They did a sort of a good cop, bad cop routine, but I don't believe it was planned. Worf here is actually following up on the pacifism thing, although not really. He's more of a wizened, older person. He doesn't necessarily believe that violence and death are always the answer anymore, and Raffi is still on that path. She thinks that some sort of mental torture or threat of violence is the perfect way to get information out of somebody. Worf seems to think that there's a better way, a different way. So it's nice to see that he's evolved a little bit, but he definitely feels and seems like the same character. We get a nice callback to DS9 here, and we also get a callback to Episode 1 because we learn that some of the people behind things, we're still not really sure how they connect, are changelings, the founders from the whole Deep Space Nine Dominion War storyline. They aren't necessarily the actual founders because Worf tells us here that there was a splinter group. He had been contacted by Odo. He doesn't reference Odo by name, but he does reference that he has a friend inside the Great Link who reached out to contact him. This friend is an honorable man. That has to be Odo. So it's a great reference to him, especially since the actor has died. He can't show up in the episode. I also like that they gave us a little hint of the changeling thing earlier on, but then also also gave us the reveal and the actual explanation within the same episode. Personally, I would have liked that little hint to have played out a little longer because I could have then theorized on it for a week, but I also like the fact that they're not dragging their feet and letting things linger episode after episode until finally revealing everything at the end. So having this changeling thing thrown into the mix also makes sense because we did see a suspicious character, actually two suspicious characters in the pilot episode, the premiere of this season, one in the 10 forward bar, one on the Titan. That one on the Titan comes back into play this episode because it turns out there's also a changeling infiltrator on the Titan, and he has been doing some sort of weird techno shenanigans to, in essence, leave a breadcrumb trail so that the Shrike or whoever else may be following them can follow the ship even when conventional scanners and conventional wisdom does not allow this to be the case. They are able to track the Titan even without sensors, so it's a little bit of a twist on the Wrath of Khan thing. They go into the nebula so that sensors can't find them, but the Shrike is still able to track them down. It's also interesting that the Shrike kept finding them, and each time they're like, the Titan is right where they should be. I kind of originally thought this was going to be some sort of foreknowledge or something from the future, but it seems like no, it's actually just they had a clever plan implemented and they were following the trails. It was also really fun to see this portal weapon be used in a more defensive and interesting manner. So it's not just being used as a method of destruction, it's being used for ship-to-ship combat. We got a fascinating shot where they kept throwing portals, I guess, in front of the Titan every time it tried to escape, that they would be sucked into the portal and come out basically where they started or behind or whatever. They're not letting them escape because they keep throwing portals in their way. And that is a really cool method of combat, I suppose. When the Titan finally decided to turn around and fire some torpedoes and phasers, I do want to point out the fact that the phasers are now, once again, a continuous beam. It's not bolts, it's beams. Really like that. I'm not sure if they're going to do that with the hand phasers, but it would be really awesome to come back to that because that just feels like Star Wars has a lightsaber, Star Trek should have beam phasers. After the Titan fired these torpedoes, the Shrike threw a portal out and, of course, sent the back of the portal behind the Titan, so they shot themselves with their own torpedoes, and they started falling further and further into the gravity well inside the middle of the nebula. Now, they pointed out one thing in this episode, one thing that has not been followed up on or has not been explained at all. Interesting readings within this nebula. It seems as if it may be a living being or there's something else going on here. They really spent no time exploring this whatsoever, but I believe that there's something else going on here and perhaps the entire nebula is living, or, and I'm just going to throw this out here, based on what we learned later in the episode with the whole changelings, a broken link, I guess you could say, an offshoot group, is this nebula actually the offshoot changelings in their new Great Link? Is this nebula actually comprised right now of all the renegade changelings? I'm just spitballing right now because it does seem like there's something alive going on with this nebula based on the readings, and that could be an interesting explanation. We also got a nice conversation here between Jean-Luc and Beverly Crusher. So we discover that yes, they actually did conceive Jack shortly around the time of Nemesis. Based on their conversation, I believe it might have actually taken place just before the events of Nemesis. And Beverly said one of the main reasons she decided to keep this from Jean-Luc is because everyone in the galaxy is always after him. She tried several different occasions to come to him and talk to him, and each time she tried to tell him he was kidnapped by the Romulans, or there was an attack on his life, or he had to meet with the Praetor and there was an explosion, or there was a big warbird attacking the ship. So she basically said, you know what? I'm not going to put my child or anyone else through this. I'm going to raise this kid on my own because I don't want him to become the target that clearly everything related to Jean-Luc Picard becomes. And then she also tries to use the whole, well, you told me you never wanted a family. You were always a Starfleet officer, etc., etc. And I do like that he came back to her like, who the hell are you to make that decision for me? How dare you use the personal information I told you against me? That's not fair. I could have been a father. I could have had a family. I could have had a wife. It was really, really good to see him actually come out of his shell and express himself here a little bit, because I feel like had this been season 1 or 2 of Picard, he would have dealt with that a bit more passively and not let these emotions build up and come out of him. So I really like to see that side of him. We got very little here in this episode as far as what happened with Jack growing up. We got an explanation for the fact that he has this accent because he went to school in London, but none of the other things that I was theorizing have been mentioned. No genetic engineering, nothing like that, no accelerated growth. So I do believe some of that may still be coming, but they have yet to actually address that within the show. We also had very little to do here with 7 of 9, but when she did come back into the show, that was fantastic as well. She is still confined to quarters. However, when the ship was under attack and Ed Speleer's character Jack Crusher decided that he came up with the reason that they were tracking them through these warp emissions or whatever ended up happening, the leaking radiation, he couldn't get to the bridge to talk to Picard or Riker, and he decided the only one I can talk to here is 7 of 9, who is confined to her quarters, goes there, has to punch out the guard. They actually figure out the problem, they try to fix it, and then it's revealed there's also a changeling on board. Here, this is the character from episode 1 who is looking a little sneaky, and he counterattacks. They think they save the ship, but it also seems like they plant a bomb on the ship or some sort of interference device, and that obviously leads to some of the issues later on as well. We also get what was teased earlier on. The relationship between Picard and Riker is now kind of strained a little bit. We kind of get to see a reversal, and we get to see some side effects, I believe, from this whole death of Thaddeus Riker flashback that we had earlier. Captain Shaw is injured on the bridge, and he basically says, you know what, Riker, you got us into this mess. You have to get us out of this, as they're taking him away to sickbay, and he gives Riker command of the Titan. William Riker, once again, captain of the Titan, and it's kind of an interesting and fun scene where he kind of sort of appoints Jean-Luc Picard as his first officer, and Picard's like, you know, you should start calling me number 1 now. After this, their relationship gets kind of strained. Riker is hell-bent on getting the ship out of Dodge, getting them out of there, saving as many lives as he can. He just wants to escape. Picard, at this point, is all about, we need to fight. We don't have any other way out of this. We need to turn and fight. We need to throw everything we have at them, even though it's pretty much clear that we're outmatched here, and there's this little ongoing tension between them where finally they're really out of options after this portal weapon. Riker decides, you know what, I'm going to go with Picard here. He decides to fire those torpedoes. As I mentioned earlier, they go through the portal and actually come back and hit the Titan, blowing all of their systems, making it so they can't warp out of there even if they wanted to, and knocks them into the gravity well. And then he finally loses it a little bit on Picard. He says, get the hell off my bridge, Picard. You've just killed us all. We're doomed now. We obviously know somehow they're going to get out of this situation based on what we've seen in the trailers and the fact that it's only episode 3. Just having this tension between the characters really feels better now that we had that flashback scene with them earlier, because we have the contrast of their older relationship and their newer relationship, and it kind of has shades of All Good Things when that alternate future Picard was kind of being put off and not respected by Riker specifically. So all of these elements are coming a little bit more into focus. I do believe that the Worf subplot with Rafi is finally going to kind of meet up with the rest of our group soon, hopefully next episode, if not maybe episode 5. I don't really know how they're going to get out of the situation and rendezvous with everyone, but I do believe that somehow they're all going to rendezvous around the Frontier Day. They're going to meet up at the Fleet Museum, and that's how Geordi is probably going to come into play. Not really sure how they're going to do that, but I'm very much finally actually excited to watch episode to episode to see where the heck things are going. But what are you thinking of the show so far? Are you really enjoying it? Is it kind of meh? Have you tuned out because of all the stuff that's come before? Leave all your thoughts below, like, share, subscribe while you're down there, and until next time,